This time on HGR Motors, we're going to build a Wampus. This is a 421 Wampus. What makes it a 421? Well, a 4 mil crank, which makes it a 58 stroke. This is a 115 rod. How do you tell if you have a 4 mil crank? Well, if it's out of the bike, an easy check is put a straight edge across the bottom of this, and there'll be no gap between the big end rod and the webs. There will be a gap there on a 54 stroke. Can you see? There you are. No gap. How do you tell if it's a long rod? With a pair of calipers, and you can measure the rod, and it'll come out to about 147 and some change, 147 and a half. That's a long rod. This one has a bad fork in it. Can you see that? Can you see the heavy groove in the fork? There's a lip on that. That's high. That's heavy side load on that one. This one's going to be replaced. So you can see the other ones are all nice and perfect. This one's got heavy side load. Hope it comes out in the video. You can see the ridge on it. This transmission is what's going to go in it. I already cut it. This is a Pro Mod. You just take every other ear off the gears for a wider window. You can see the shiny parts in there that have been cut. Hopefully that catches on camera. This engine was brought to me disassembled in a bunch of pieces on a budget. We'll see what we can do with it and see what it ends up costing him. I'm going to disassemble this and take the fork out. I'm going to pull this shift fork out. This is the number 2 shift fork. This is the one that's a little bigger. I'm going to replace this. So we pull the C-clip out of there. You have to have the eccentric pulled. That holds that in place. You just pull the rod straight out. There's number 1, which is in perfect order. Number 2, which is 8 up. Perfect on one side, 8 to pieces on the other. Got a brand new one we're going to stick in. First, number 1 goes in first. Then number 2. Then put the little clip back in. Voila. All these shift forks look good now. Okay, start assembling this back together. This side cover was off. It has a little O-ring on it. Just give it a little oil, and it can only go in one way. The holes only line up one way. Some Loctite. Loctite these babies down. This drum slides back and forth. This goes under it to hold it in place, right under the collar there. And then 2 screws hold it in. It also holds the shaft for the front shift fork in. A little Loctite. Just double checking that. All right, I'm going to do that shift shaft next. I like adjusting all this before it goes in. You can see that's a modified shift star also. All the tops are rounded off except this one, because this is 6, this is first. It won't roll past this. This roller goes up and over all these humps. This is neutral. That looks good right about there. "17", we'll tighten it down. This little locking one's a little beat up. The eccentrics looks a little beat up also, but it puts the claw in the right place. The spring feels like it has a good tension on it. So we're going to use this guy. We will bend that flap up. And that holds the rod in for the shift forks on the back side here. There's the rod for the shift fork on the front. Beautiful, ready to assemble. This customer also brought in all his seals and gaskets, most of them anyway. There's a few things here and there missing. One of them was he didn't have this transmission bearing, but I had one in stock. I'm going to set everything down in here. Just line everything up so it sits in nice. Got all the half moon clips in. Get everything moved over so it gets in the shift forks correctly. This is over on first gear. Everything seems to be seated fine. Just rotating it through everything, seeing it shift all the gears, making sure everything slides back and forth without too much problem. Nice shifting. Let's get the seals all put in. Again, a little lube on these, and they all push in with the thumb. Just thumb it in. Oops, wrong one. There we go. Thumb it in, just like that. Little lube on the shaft. Slide it right through. It's already been fitted. All right, this guy, lube, stretch. Remember that spring on the back. Don't get him folded over. I'm going to flip this collar. It's got wear on one side. This way the seal rides on a different surface area than it did the last time. Put the crank in. Always put it on like it goes inside out, this side out. They're ribbed. You just set into place. Ribs towards the bearing. And the seal is ribbed to set it right in the case. Just a simple bead, 1211 3-bond all the way around the case. Start wherever you like and just I always seal across the front here, because if you don't, water and mud gets in those little valleys and it just makes more to clean up. Full seal. Double check. You went around everything. No air gaps. I'm going to push the front seal, or the clutch actuator that goes in the top of this case in, and put the clutch actuator in. I like this in. Make sure the spring is around the neck, and this part is on the other side of the little square there. All right, and then we lay it on top. There's no dowel pins here. The dowel pins are in the upper case. Just make sure you always have them. It aligns the case right. Water pump, kicker seal. We'll put those in later. And that is the lid on the motor. Then we start dropping in all the 10mm bolts. That's the long one, goes there. This guy goes in here because he's got the arm that holds that actuator from pushing out. All these guys are the same size, including the one that holds down the actuator. Two short ones go in the very rear. And then just tighten them down in sequence. You're supposed to start on the bottom. I always start on the top, and then come around and tighten them up after I tighten the bottom. You start here, the numbers are on the case, and we go in this sequence. Now we'll go back through and torque those all to specs. Once you're done assembling the case top and bottom, the first thing I do is roll everything through. This particular bearing didn't have a cover on either side. It is a coil bearing. It looks factory, but it's not capped off on either side, so this one's not inside out. It just didn't have a cap on it. But everything flows freely. Put the idle kicker gear on. It's a washer. Then the gear. Then the little de-washer only goes on one way. And then the lock. And there you go. I always like just sticking the kicker gear in there also. It's very easy. Just line it up. Spin this around and wham. Very easy. These can be tricky when they're new. This is a brand new gear, brand new key on an aftermarket crank. Now these tolerances are machined really, really tight. So just sometimes they don't slide on. You just have to get them just perfectly squared up. Don't use a lot of force. I mean, that is key. All right, this slides right in. This one did well. Make sure that spring or the lip doesn't fold. And that one went in perfect. Water pump gear, also brand new. Goes right on the top. This water hose was pulled out, probably to paint the case. Again, this motor was disassembled. These are pretty easy to put in. You can do it all with your fingers. Retainer clip first. Just make sure that seats. And then a new O-ring, little oil on them. And the O-ring will slide right over the top. I said slide right over the top. There we go. Okay, I need the washer. It's lucky I have all this stuff in stock. Most of the Banshee stuff I do because I do a lot of Banshee motors. New from the factory. New nut. Of course, some Loctite. She's done. Got a new half clip. He didn't have one with some screws. I see a lot of motors that don't have these, and I see a lot of guys running them without it. I've never seen anything bad happen. Even drag bikes I see run without them. But it does serve a purpose, and I always add them in. One thing is, it's really not that bad. Loctite added. There's no gear on the back of this, so we're going to press this out and press this one on so he has a gear. Remember, washer, everything's been pre-oiled. This cylinder piece that goes inside, we got the gear put on there. All these teeth look good. Let's slide this over. Sometimes you just have to wiggle this in to get them to fit between the idle kicker gear and the primary drive gear here. Again, just making sure everything's flowing real nice. Don't want to have to take half the motor apart because you didn't check that everything was clearing. All right, another washer. The inner boss. Then all the clutches. This is a brand new clutch kit. Fiber, steel, all the way through. Got all the fibers and steels in. Rod. This is a brand new rod because he didn't have one. And ball bearing. He didn't have that either. Let's put on the lock washer for the clutch. Inner boss. Lock washer's new. He had the nut. Just get it lined up with that lock washer and then bend the tab over. Like so. Put on the outer throwout plate. Oh, can't do that without putting in the pancake bearing. Remember, these pancake bearings keep that ball and rod from welding to each other. They're adjustable with the little bearing inside there that spins. I will adjust it once it's on. The correct way to do this is to line the arrow up with the circle. But it's 50-50. It doesn't have to line up there. It'll go on half of the time. This is out, this is on. But they reference the arrow to line up. I just throw it on because 50% of the time you'll get it right. Okay, we got half and half here. We got half drag springs and half stock springs, because the drag springs will wear your forearm out. And this is not an all drag bike, this is just a dooner. I'm just adjusting this, trying to get the arrows to line up. There we are, I like that. Right there. And then you just take there we go. I tested the stator to make sure that it was pulling the correct resistance. This is an OEM stator. It's an old style OEM stator, but still works great according to the meter. If it's a race gas motor, I'll adjust it. I'll have to look at the notes. Let's make sure this is on 0. Because again, we think it's a pump gas motor. There we go. 0 means factory timing, nothing above factory timing. New woodruff key because he didn't have one. Oh, that looks like the epoxy's cracked on it, but it's still soldered in. The epoxy's cracks when they get old. Woodruff key. New woodruff key in. Flywheel over the top. This flywheel, no magnets broke, but you can see that somebody had a jaw puller on it, and it does have some lines in it. We will see if it's good. Little Loctite. New flywheel nut. Check the gap, needs to be 18 thousandths. Got my little cheater cardboard here. And we're good. If you have to adjust these, it's the two little screws right there. Can you see the other screw down there? All right, we got the 68mm pistons for the Wampus. You take your rings, you square them up in the side they're going to go in. This size I like about 12 thousandths minimum, and this meets the minimum requirement. Square it up. 12 thousandths minimum. These two for this side with this piston. Right. Put the little circlip in. Let's get these out. I like to take this, stick it in for a backing. And square it up. There we go. Popped it in. Got the wrist pin bearing. Just slides right on. Windows towards the intake. Get the other circlip. There we go. We will put the rings on now. Number or letter side up. It's not directional on these Banshees, but and they just slip right on. Start it at the dowel pin and go all the way around. These Wiseco's have dowel pins. These are Wiseco 573s, or basically blaster pistons. All the 68mm Cub, Wampuses, Servals all take the blaster piston, 68mm. There you go. All right, I have this 4mm long rod all together, 421 Wampus. Now, before I put the cylinders on, I'm gonna have to port it. Drew up all my lines. We're gonna get in this bad boy and open her up, make her a high horsepower dooner. All right, I just finished up the 421 Wampus cylinder. You can see all the shavings are still all over the place. This is fully ported now for the Glamis dunes here. All I'm going to do is install the pipe plugs. These are 1/4-inch pipe plugs. Do it with the 1211 3-bond. And did I forget to show you on this assembly? When you put the water pump gear on, and make sure you squeeze a little 1211 3-bond into that square keyhole. It's machined pretty tight, but every once in a while they will leak, and you don't want to have to take that all apart to plug that leak up. All right, this is very simple. Just a little 3-bond around the pipe plug and install it. And all you have to do is turn it down far enough so it's below the mating surface. Piece of cake. You don't need to jam them all the way down in there. Some guys spun them so much they spun all the way through and dropped into the water jacket. Very simple. They all go in. I got this Wampus cylinder all cleaned up. I did a really light surface across the top here just because it had a little gack in it and it was raised. So I just did a very light pass, say 1/1000th maybe, just to get it even. Now I'm going to take these water plugs that I put in and just razor blade off the excess. And I just take a razor blade and I just make a pass. And this lets me know that I countersunk them deep enough. There, now they're all flush. I'm going to put this on the cylinder now. I put the cylinder on the case now. Let's see if I can show you how I do this. The Wampus is a little easier as it doesn't have the extended stud. You don't have to put extended studs here on the case. It's 68mm pistons. Again, I take the rings, I center them on the dowels, I get one started, then I turn it just slightly, center up the rings on the dowels. There we go. I might make it look easy. I see a lot of people have issues with this. I've watched them. I've been doing this for a long time, so if you have to wrestle with it a little, most people do. And I take it and set it down. Ouch. Careful of sharp machine pieces on the case. I slice my fingers up all the time. All right. Make sure everything rolls through. Give it a little spray. All right, time to do the head and the intakes. Gonna replace the water pump seal and bearing. I got a new seal and a new bearing. I use sockets that are just a little bit smaller so that I can pop them in and out. I got those already. Take this off. This one had 5mm Allen screws. They come with Phillips style screws from the factory. These are factory screws. I loosened these up already. Sometimes you need to pound on those pretty good to get them out. This one looks pretty clean. We'll give it a new gasket. Clean there. Flip it over. Take the little clip out. Clip. Washer. Gear. Gear should pull right up. Sometimes they do get gacked up and welded into place. You can pull it off. Slide the pin out and then just push the pump through. Take a look at the pump. This one's not cracked, warped. No signs of bad wear. It's good. Stick it back in. We will pound the bearing. These sometimes they just fall right out. They're just perfectly fit. But the seals we have to pound out. Get a socket that fits in there and give it a wallop. And it comes right out. Voila. Old out. This one doesn't have a water side marking, but I know the flat side goes up against the bearing. This side is the water side. Clean it out. This one's really clean. And we'll pop the new one in. I set the seal down in there. Give it a little squirt of some oil. Pushed it as far as I could in with my thumbs. I could never get this one all the way in with my thumbs. Then I take a socket and I get it the rest of the way in there. And then I get the bearing, new bearing. Sometimes they'll just drop right in. This one does. We'll give it a few taps. Make sure it's seated, because if it's not, you won't get that to come up through the back side and the pin won't go in. Plenty of clearance there. Pin should drop right in. Just center it and then just put this down over the top. Engaged. Washer. Clip. All back together. Clean this side out. Somebody went and chromed this. Usually you polish this aluminum and it's just flaking off. Now this isn't an absolute necessary thing to do. The coolant system is a very low pressure system, but I do this just for added insurance. Just a little bit of 3 bond to seal this area up. But on all mine personal bikes, I don't ever do it, and I don't think I've ever had one leak. There's the seal there. You can pop that right out. Pops out very easily. All done. I want to show you putting studs in any Cub cylinder, CPI cylinder, or for that matter, any cylinder that's got nickel plate on it. Don't take the studs and torque them down. If you try torquing them down to, let's just say 20 or 30 foot-pounds or something like that, or even higher, it'll spread the aluminum and bulge the Nicosil and even crack it. Even bulging it will mess it up when the piston comes past top dead center. You'll end up with problems. So just take your studs, put a little bit of Loctite on it, and then just crank them in by hand. Don't tighten them anymore. I mean, obviously, if you're too weak to even thread them in by hand, just chase or clean up the threads and give it a little, just a little bump. Just that's it. Just like that. Don't do any more. You'll be sorry. Now, we have a chariot head. This is a single piece head. You have to do a little assembly on this head. The chariot head comes in pieces. So there's the little chariot The chariot head comes in pieces. There are little parts, like this little chariot top that goes right here. And all these pieces can leak. There's an O-ring. Put all your O-rings in, grease them with bearing grease. I grease them all up before I insert them, and that helps them stay in place, so when you turn it upside down, they don't fall out. And just tighten them all down. You can use even a little 3-bond, 1211 3-bond on it to get it to seat. And not leak. A little 3-bond on the O-rings won't hurt them. It'll be a mess when you take them off, and you'll need new ones, but it'll keep it from leaking. If you don't like doing things twice, don't be afraid to use sealant on stuff. Even if it's a little much, it just makes disassembling and cleanup a pain in the butt, but you will not leak. These are just greased and tightened. So there's a little cap. Same with the back water neck here. Grease it, stick it in, and tighten them down. You can even put a little Loctite on these bolts here so they don't back out. There, that's the outside of the head. You flip it around. You've got 2 O-rings in the spark plug area. Right there. Just seat them right in. And then 2 around each of the dome insert areas. It seals it to the deck. Grease makes it stick to everything. It wants to stick to my fingers. Stick to each other. Okay, those are put in. And this is a 1-piece head. It takes a lot less O-rings. These are the ones you sometimes have to stretch out. These are the 68 millimeter bore, and these will go 64 to 68. So I give them a little yank. You just yank them apart, stretch them out a little bit, and then put them on. And I take my little dummy spark plugs, thread them in, put the dome in with the notch lined up with that nipple. Falls right in, right in. I'm going to put this head on now. You should always test fit the head before you grease an O-ring and get everything set, because sometimes it won't go on real nice and you'll have to maybe file or tap a stud one way or the other, and it should just set down just like that. I'm going to double check the O-rings. Everything looks good. I am going to insert the little water neck here, as I should have did that before I put it on, but there's 100 ways to skin a cat. You don't have to do everything in the exact order. And the way you build these, you can build them 100 different ways also. I do not use the copper washers. I don't like them. They're good for a use, maybe 2. I put a little bead of 3-bond case sealer around every nut, and then torque to spec And then every time I take the head off and redo it, I just wipe these clean and then retorque to spec. I like it better than buying copper washers at 20 bucks a pop. That will, thread locker or case sealant will seal it so it doesn't leak. Be careful and don't tighten this down. It usually has kind of a taper as it gets tighter as the thread inserts, so you don't have to bottom it out. Just get it till it feels like it's snug, and that's it. Just left with the water neck here. I slide this on last after the head's all torqued down. Oh. It's like a snake swallowing a buffalo. Open up. Okay, there we go. And we'll just tighten the hose down. There you go, nice install. You can see that there's a nice little bead of 3-bond 1211 around all the nuts that have been torqued down. I usually torque these cool heads down 20 foot-pound. Clutch cover gasket, I always grease that O-ring up. I always put 3-bond around the bottom up to where about the oil level is supposed to be. I don't go all the way around because the case is not that full. And just kind of tack it to hold it in place there. This gasket's a little warped from sitting around. Wants to bend up. I also take the clutch cover, and that's got a little 3-bond on it. Again, just halfway around, just for the oil line. Got the dowel. Usually the dowel pin is better in the case here to hold the gasket, but this one came out in the clutch cover, and doesn't matter, it can be on either side. It just makes it easier when it's in the case instead of the clutch cover. Okay, gasket flattened right out. I'll make sure all the holes are lined up, and we will start putting all our clutch cover Allen bolts in. Unfortunately, that's it for the 421 Wampus build. The reed cages and intakes are being bolted on by the customer. He's picking it up locally. So no squish test was done and no leak down test was done. The next one, the 421 build, I do get a squish test. I show you how to do a proper squish test. Unfortunately, no leak down test yet because we found something wrong with it, and it's right here going to get plated. Stay tuned for the 421 build next.